Hello, and
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
hello, and welcome to this Solar Washington webinar, the first one of 2023. I'm glad you could join us live today or later if watching a recording of this session. My name is Chantal Stevens, and I'm the Executive Director of Solar Washington. A few words about us. Solar Washington is an association of folks who work in, for, or around solar, who use, study, or support solar. We recognize the importance of clean energy to support the economic, environmental, and social vitality and improve the resilience of communities throughout Washington state. We do this by sharing information, providing educational opportunities like this one, engaging communities, and working with various stakeholders. If you are not, or not anymore, a member of Solar Washington, I want to encourage you to join. I will include a link to the webpage where you can sign up in the comment section of the webinar. If you are a member or a sponsor, thank you. Events like this are only possible because your contributions as dues or sponsorships support our work. And now I will turn it over to Micah McLean, who is Business and Cooperative Specialist and Washington State Energy Coordinator at the USDA Wenatchee Field Office. Micah has worked at USDA Rural Development since 2015. Prior to joining the Business and Cooperatives programs, she worked in both single-family and multifamily housing. As the energy coordinator for Washington State, she's the lead for the energy program, including REAP. There will be plenty of time for questions at the end of Micah's presentation, but if you have a question that can't wait, please type it in the question section. Also, when you leave the webinar, there will be a quick survey. Please take a moment to tell us what topic you'd like to see covered in future webinars. And now, Micah.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, can you see my PowerPoint I've got pulled up?
Not yet, but we saw the
No?
first page to it, and then it disappeared.
Oh. Any luck now?
Oh, there we go.
Got it? Okay. All right, thank you everybody for coming and attending virtually.
I'm
going
sorry,
to...
Micah, it went back dark. It showed briefly and then went back dark.
Weird. Okay, let me try.
Yeah, I think it went away when you put it in presentation mode.
Oh. Sorry. Yeah, so screen sharing is paused. I'll keep trying things, so you let me know when you can see the screen.
You take it out of presentation mode.
Would you try maybe sending that to me again? show screen. Okay, is it working now?
I don't see it now.
Sorry, we even practiced.
There's nothing there we go. Now we're seeing again the screen in, not sure what you call the non-presentation mode. Maybe you should just keep this. It's, I think we can see it well.
Sure, we can just do that. I'm fine with it. Okay, sorry about that, everybody. Okay, so today I'm going to be going through an overview of the Renewable Energy for America program, as well as informing you of some of the recent changes that have impacted the program due to the Inflation Reduction Act. All right, so a little bit of very general what the REAP program is for. It is to assist small rural businesses and agricultural producers via grants and loans to install renewable energy systems and to make energy efficiency improvements. One thing with the REAP program is every year there will be a notice of solicitation of applications that is published in the Federal Register. And within this notice, it's going to include information about how to apply for the program, what eligible expenses are, if there's any changes to how we score applications. And it will also usually have information on our expected funding for the fiscal year. I'm sure we'll be able to send this presentation out to everybody that is attending. And I do have a link to the fiscal year 2023 notice to apply for the program, or you can look it up on the Federal Register as well. But it's definitely good to have that handy when you're thinking about applying, to make sure that the project would be eligible and make sure everything that we need in the application is submitted. So the big news with REAP this year is the maximum grant amount for each project has been increased from 25% of the eligible cost up to 40%. And at the same time, they've also increased the maximum dollar amount that can be requested, and it's actually doubled for each. So if someone is applying for a renewable energy system, they would be eligible for up to 40% of the cost of the system, or $1 million, whichever is less. And this is compared to previous years where it's always been 25% of the eligible cost, or $500,000. And for the energy efficiency improvements, it also has a 40% eligible grant reimbursement, and the maximum grant has increased from $250,000 up to $500,000. When you're applying for the REAP program or helping someone to apply for it, there are two different project types, and that is the renewable energy systems or energy efficiency improvements. If you are going to be making multiple energy efficiency improvements to your business, that would all come in under one application. If you are going to be doing for example, a solar system and upgrading lighting, then in that case, you would apply, you would submit two applications, one for renewable energy systems and one for energy efficiency. even though they're both under the REAP program, there is 2 separate types of projects that you could apply for. And if anybody has questions at all or wants me to elaborate on something or repeat anything, please put it in the chat and we'll make sure to be checking that. The other big news for REAP after the Inflation Reduction Act was passed is our funding for the grant program. Historically, it's been $50 million was our regular allocation for the country, and that comes through the 2018 Farm Bill. But the Inflation Reduction Act provided the REAP grant with an additional $2 billion over the next 10 years, which breaks down to about $250 million of additional funding each year. What that means for Washington State is that we're expecting about 5 times or 5 times as much funding this year for REAP grants. So it's definitely a great time to apply if anybody has been contemplating it recently. So moving on to eligible applicants, there are 2 types of applicants that are eligible for the REAP program. The first one I'll go over is agricultural producers. In order to meet the definition of an agricultural producer, it could be an individual or an entity, but they need to be able to show that over half of their income is derived from ag production. And this can be looked up somewhat easily with farm schedules or tax returns. We can assist with verifying that for you if there's any questions on whether or not you meet the ag producer definition. If you don't, for whatever reason, then we just encourage people to apply as a rural small business, since there isn't really any difference between the 2. It's just a matter of meeting at least one. The only time that being an agricultural producer is beneficial to you as the applicant would be if you're located in an area that's not within our rural eligibility map, because there is no rural requirement for ag producers under this program. The other type of eligible applicant is the rural small business. And in order to meet this definition, your project has to be located in an eligible rural area. And I have links here to our website where you can type in your business or farm address, and it will let you know if you're in an eligible rural area. I do have a map right here that shows our state, and all of the areas that have this yellow highlight over them are where there's ineligible areas. And so as you can see, there are many more areas in the state that are eligible for a program than not. And it's pretty easy to tell if a project's going to be eligible just by a map like this, but I definitely recommend still plugging your address into the site and checking before you get too far with trying to apply. Once you determine that you're in an eligible rural area, the next thing would be making sure that you meet the definition of a small business. And USDA uses the Small Business Administration Small Business Size Standards. So I have a link right here that if you click that, it will pull up the SBA's website where you will plug in your business's NAICS code. You can find that on your tax returns if you're not sure what your NAICS code is. And that'll tell you what the requirements are based on the industry that you're in to be considered a small business. Most of the time it's based on revenue, but sometimes it can be on the number of employees that you have too. And so after we've determined it's a rural area, small business, we then need to make sure that it meets one of these requirements here. So the formation of the business, it does need to be a for-profit entity, or sole proprietor is eligible as well. It could also be a cooperative, electric utility, or tribal corporation. Those are the only types of applicants that would be meet our definition of a rural small business. And the one type of nonprofit that's eligible would only be an agricultural producer that's a cooperative nonprofit. Every other nonprofit is not eligible for our program, nor would cities, towns, schools, organizations of that nature wouldn't be eligible either. And for those folks, I recommend checking out the programs through the Department of Commerce. They have programs that fit the folks that aren't eligible for ours most of the time. So for the first type of project would be a renewable energy system. And I've got a list here on the screen of some of the most common types of renewable energy systems that we see. By far, solar is, I'd say like 96% of what we do, or what we see on these renewable energy system projects are all solar. We'll sometimes have a couple wind, anaerobic digesters, or geothermal projects that come through as well. Okay, the other type of project is the energy efficiency improvement. On the screen here, there's a couple examples of what projects under this category could include. And essentially, it's any type of upgrade that a business or ag producer is making to their facility that is going to show a savings in energy. And it doesn't have to be just lighting, heating, and cooling. It could be a new oven. It could be new refrigeration. Pieces of new equipment are pretty common as well. One of the, I'd say, most interesting energy efficiency improvement projects I saw come through was actually for Mission Ridge Ski Resort here in Wenatchee. They utilized our REAP guaranteed loan. They didn't apply for a grant, but they utilized the guaranteed loan to purchase a new chairlift. And because that chairlift was more energy efficient than the previous, it was eligible for the program. So for these projects, they can be a little creative. So if you have any ideas or thoughts about something and you just want to run it past someone at USDA, we're really pretty easy to get in contact with, and don't hesitate to reach out and ask. Eligible project costs for this program. The big one is that we will need to have the application submitted and complete before any costs are incurred for the project. And this includes if you put down a deposit, for example, on a solar system, and then you submitted your application, that deposit amount that you put down wouldn't be eligible. We would reduce that from the total project cost to take it out. So keep that in mind if you're thinking of applying or working with someone to apply for the program. So be careful of when you place deposits and make payments. Obviously, the equipment, installation, any fees, permits, or licenses that are associated with the project, those would most likely be eligible as well. Few ineligible costs would be anything remotely related to residential. So this includes apartments, rental properties, vacation homes, VRBO, Airbnb properties. Anything residential is not going to be eligible for REAP at all. And then again, just any expenses that were incurred before the application was submitted, those wouldn't be eligible either. Anything associated with a vehicle isn't going to be a good fit for this program. And any fees that you paid or need to pay for application prep, like if you hired a consultant or a grant writer to assist with the project application, that's fine, but we just wouldn't be able to include that in our eligible project costs.
Micah, since there's a question that related to eligibility, since this is a federal program, I assume cannabis farmers are not eligible as ag producers. I assume you can confirm that.
Yeah, I was trying to pull the chat up to read that, but I can't. Could you repeat that, please?
Oh, cannabis farmers.
Oh, that's a great question.
This being a program, yeah.
Yeah, so it's very interesting how we handle cannabis farmers. If the short answer is no, but our state is working towards eventually being able to. So they have to go through and do like the state plan with, I think it's AMS, that agency. But no, the cannabis farmers right now are not eligible.
Thank you.
A couple of our programs, if it's more of a hemp product or CBD product, then it could be eligible. And as long as it's nothing that's being ingested, there's also a chance that it could be. So it's probably worth a conversation with your local specialist to really kind of get a grip on what exactly the business is doing.
Another question is about vineyards.
Mm-hmm. Yes, vineyards would definitely be eligible. And we've done REAP projects on quite a few of them, actually, with just regular solar systems. We've also done a few geothermal projects for wineries, and that's for if you're a winery and you have an orchard, you could apply as an ag producer or a rural small business, most likely.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So the last one here for ineligible project costs would be any payments that are going to be made to the applicant, owner, or a family member. And this comes into play when we have someone who maybe the owner is planning on installing the solar panels themselves, or a family member is planning on doing the construction for an improvement. Although that is eligible, as long as they're qualified to do the work, we just wouldn't be able to include any payments that are planned to be made to them in our project costs.
We have another question. You may be answering, or you may have answered that, but So they assume that the affordable housing projects would come in the Department of Commerce. Is that correct?
Potentially. So if the housing project is owned by a nonprofit, like a housing authority, then there's probably a good chance that they would be eligible for the Department of Commerce programs.
Ah. Yeah, please let me know if you have any follow-ups to those questions, or if you felt that they were answered how you wanted.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Micah.
Yeah, so I'm going to go into a little bit more detail of how we handle residents being co-located with the small business or farm. We've seen this a lot more recently, where there might be a small business that's operating out of the home or out of the garage, or if it's a farm and there's a residence on the farm and they're on the same meter. If you have a situation like that and you're wanting to apply for the program, you will need to provide documentation that shows and breaks out the actual historic business electric use versus the residential electric use. We will then take those calculations to make sure that we have the correct eligible project costs and maximum grant. Sometimes it's not going to result in any grant reduction, even if we have a residence on the same meter as a business. And that would be if a solar system is sized to where 100% of that electricity is going to offset business use. And an example here would be if you're going to install a system that'll produce 16,000 kilowatt hours and it costs $40,000. If the application provides the document to show that the business used more than the system is going to generate, then 100% of the project would be eligible, and we wouldn't need to reduce the grant. So for that example, the applicant would be eligible for a $16,000 grant, even though there's a residence associated with it. If the system's going to be generating more electricity than the business used historically, in that case, we would then have to reduce the grant proportionately. So we would need to use the historic business information to figure out how much of the system, what percentage of the system is going to benefit the business. And that's what we would then use to calculate the eligible project cost. So in this little example here, I've got 16,000 kilowatt hour system that's going to cost $40,000. And then there's documentation to show 13,000 kilowatt hours was business use. And we'll say 10,000 kilowatt hours was residential. We would figure out what percentage of the project is eligible. We would multiply that by the cost of the system to get the eligible project cost. We would then multiply that by the maximum grant amount, which is 40%, which results in a grant of $13,000. So as you can see in these two examples, we've got the system size the same cost, but that doesn't necessarily mean the grant's going to be the same amount. So it is going to be a little bit less if we've got some residential energy in there. And lastly, for residential use, or when there's a residence associated, we do have to show that more than half of the solar system energy that's going to be generated is going to benefit the business. And if it doesn't, then that project wouldn't be eligible. So in this example of the system size at 16,000 kilowatt hours, and the business historically only used 8,000 kilowatt hours a year, then this would not be an eligible project. It's definitely good to keep this in mind when we do have in-home businesses, or a lot of the times farms also have a hard time showing that they historically used enough energy to support a solar system. So when we're sizing systems, it's important to keep this part in mind. I know this one is a lot and can be very confusing. Are there any questions about residential and business use?
So yes, there's a question, and I'm not sure, given the information you gave, how you would answer that. But would a small solar farm less than 5 megawatts, be eligible for grant?
Yes, yep, you can. You can use this program to strictly generate energy and sell to the utility companies. We've done that a few times. And yeah, then the business would just be the solar farm. So yeah, definitely eligible.
Okay, Jeff, please let me know if that didn't answer your question. We have several questions here. I'm not sure if this is the right time to ask them. What type of documentation are you looking for on a grant to show residential business power usage, utility bills, HERS, HERS report, energy audits, list of appliances and load at the business, etc.?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it can be done a few different ways. Pretty much whatever makes the most sense and can give you the most accurate historic use breakdown is what I would recommend. We do prefer to see some type of energy assessment, appliance assessment done by a third party if possible, but it's not required to be done by a third party. If the applicant has the information and the tools to show how much energy their business used, then that's okay. But a lot of the times we are needing to kind of go back to the applicant and have some things explained or supplemental stuff submitted to make sure that we're doing our due diligence there.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's a couple websites you can use online to kind of help, or reach out to an energy consultant to get a hand on it.
Thank you. And actually, we will include some of those links that you are sharing with us in the post-webinar email you will be receiving, so you can have access to those. Another question, back to eligibility. You stated earlier that an agricultural organization could apply even if they are not located in a rural area, as long as they generated 51% of their revenue from agricultural activities. Does that mean urban gardens that are located in the city, they would still be eligible for REAP? Is that correct?
Yep, as long as they meet the definition of an agricultural producer, then they would be eligible. Yep.
So
one of the issues that I've seen though with...
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay. Just going to say, one of the issues that we've seen with projects like that, though, is we have a hard time showing enough historic energy being used for a system to make sense, but it is eligible.
Okay. I think we covered all the questions at this point.
Perfect. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about the REAP guaranteed loan. So this is a very similar process to if you're familiar with how SBA guaranteed loans are, where you go to your local bank and you're working with a lender, and they might recommend they package the loan up as under an SBA guaranteed loan. It's really the same thing. So this isn't a loan program where an interested party would come to us at USDA to apply for. You need to be working with a lender of your choosing. And if it makes sense for the lender and for the applicant to seek out a guarantee on their loan, then it's actually the lender that comes to USDA and applies for it. There is a requirement for any guaranteed loan under REAP that 25% of the project cost would need to come from borrower contribution. So the loan can be up to 75% and the 25% need to be injected by the borrower. The eligibility requirements are the same for the guaranteed loan as I just went over for the grant, where you need to be an agricultural producer, a rural small business. The project eligibility is also the same as well. And if you are interested in looking into this a little bit more and you're working with a lender, don't feel like you need to understand how this program works and explain it to them. You can just give your bank your contact info for your local USDA rep, and we will work with the lender to get the project going. Got a couple examples here of some past projects. The first one, it was energy efficient lighting system. So we upgraded all of the lighting in this facility to LED and had the lights put on sensors, motion sensors. And the total project cost is a little over $78,000. And the REAP grant was a little over $19,000. And this resulted in 50% savings on their lighting bill. The second example here was a grocery store that used the energy efficient program to upgrade their cooler doors in their grocery store. And by doing this, they are now saving $500 a month on their utility bill, and they received a REAP grant of $8,800. And one thing to just keep in mind is if your project is going to involve any ground disturbance, definitely reach out to us at RD so that we can look into your project, chat with you about it, see if there's any environmental requirements that we would need to be mindful of, because sometimes they can take a little bit of time. If we need an environmental report, that can take 6, 7, maybe even 8 weeks for us to complete. So it's always good to just let us know ahead of time if you're concerned or if you think we might need to look at the environmental requirements a little closely. All right. For the application process, it's not as terrifying as any other grant programs that we have at USDA. I'd say the REAP program is probably the simplest to apply for. That said, if you've never applied for a grant before, it's still, I wouldn't be surprised if it's a little daunting. But we have a couple federal forms that we require you to submit. And the big thing that I'll mention right now is if you are interested in applying or you're helping someone to apply, I would absolutely get started on getting your entity registered in SAM. The System for Awards Management is what SAM stands for, and it's a process that's required before the application deadline. You have to be registered in SAM, but it's also a process that can be timely and a little frustrating. I've had a lot of applicants that are just having a tough time with getting that registration through. So the earlier you can get started, the better. And always use the official SAM website, and keep in mind that registering in SAM is always free. You never need to pay to register, be verified. SAM is a free system. And for some reason, there are just like a lot of scams out there around SAM, people trying to get businesses to pay them to get them registered at SAM and yada yada. So the applications, this one over here on the left is the REAP Renewable Energy application. This one on the right is another application document that we need submitted. This is application for federal assistance. So it's not specific to REAP, it's just for federal grants. And I just wanted to point out that on the REAP application, there's a really good checklist on the back that you can use to make sure you've submitted all of your supplemental documents and any documents that are required to be submitted. Along with our federal forms, we will also need a copy of the contractor's bid. And then if it is an energy efficiency improvement project, that is when we will need an energy assessment to be submitted. These energy assessments do have to be completed by a qualified third party, and they have to be submitted before the application deadline. So if you're looking at energy efficiency improvements, be mindful that you will need an energy assessment completed. For the renewable energy systems, there's no energy assessment requirement, but we will need documentation of historic use. So copies of your utility bills, things like that. Then, so everything gets submitted to your local RD, Rural Development Office. We accept applications via email or mail, whichever you prefer. And if you submit your application prior to the deadline, you can always ask us for a completeness review. We'll take a look and make sure that you've got anything and give you feedback if there's something missing or something we need clarification on. And I will say that the earlier you get this application into us, probably the more thorough our review is going to be able to be. There's only so much we can do the day before the deadline. If we get 30 applications submitted, we'll try our best to review them all, but we're wanting it a little more thorough. The sooner the better. All right, for deadlines to apply, there are two to be mindful of. Sorry, I have a little bit of a cough. There are two due dates to be mindful of. The first one coming, or the one coming up next, is March 31st, and this is going to be the deadline to apply for FY23 funding, and it is for grants of any size. And I do have listed here estimated award dates. I would say between July and September. I know that's a pretty big gap between those two, but it's because our program works is if you If your application competes for funding and it's not funded, there's another round of competitions that it could apply for or that it could compete in and maybe get funded. The next date to be aware of is October 31st. This is going to be for fiscal year 2024 funding, and it is only for grants that are $20,000 or less. So if you're requesting a grant amount under that size, I definitely would recommend submitting an application by October 31st. This is a much smaller pool of applications. There's less competition. You're only competing for funding against projects of similar size, which is helpful. That way we don't have our small grants competing against a massive solar farm that's most likely going to score better. Grants that are submitted by this October 31st deadline also will receive funding a lot earlier. Since it's our first round, they get kind of the first grab at our allocation as well. Okay, and that's why the dates for award estimates are between February and September, because these grants will have opportunities to compete in up to 5 competitions throughout the year. If they're not awarded, then there'll be more opportunities for it to be funded. Guaranteed loans, we accept those and fund those year round. So no due dates to be aware of for that program. And I know this was a lot, so I do have an example of kind of how the application timeline works for people. So we're going to pretend that we've got an application for FY23, and the application was submitted on 9/1 for a grant request of $50,000. Now, because the grant request is more than that $20,000, the deadline for this application isn't until March 31st, but it was submitted in September. So we are going to review it, confirm it's complete, check to see if there's any environmental requirements, and then we have to hold on to that application and wait until the application deadline of March 31st. Beneficial for some people to submit their applications early like this, depending on their motives. So I have here 2 examples. We've got our applicant number 1. They submitted this application early, and they are planning on moving forward with the project before knowing if they're going to receive the grant or not. So as soon as they've submitted that application, they can turn right around, make their purchases, get the system up and running, pay the contractors, and then they just wait and see if they are going to receive the grant or not. That's one way that people can move forward with their projects. The other option that applicants have is just getting your application submitted and not incurring any costs until they know if they're going to receive the grant. So those are the 2 different ways to handle applying for the program and working on your project. So once we've got the application, after the deadline, the application is going to be competing against other Washington state apps. So we have state competitions, and we usually receive our allocation and compete them in June or July. So, and I do kind of anticipate about the same timeline for this year, which I think is going to be closer to June, is when we're going to be able to start announcing awards for projects received before March 31st. If the grant is awarded, we will notify the applicant and work with them on getting the obligation paperwork submitted. If the grant is not awarded, we will hold on to that application, and in September, usually, there will be a national office competition. So we will then submit it up in that and see if it gets funded. If the grant was awarded, this applicant number one, since their project is complete, they can request grant reimbursement right away. As soon as they've been notified in June that they've received the grant, they can request reimbursement. The second applicant, they will have up to 2 years to complete their project and request their grant if theirs was awarded. So that's also something to be mindful of, is how long it'll take to receive the grant. For both of these examples, if they did not receive the grant, our first applicant who's already completed construction and the project's up and running, they would not be eligible to resubmit their application the next fiscal year because their project's complete. However, the second applicant who was waiting to hear if they will receive a grant, they would be eligible to resubmit their application the next fiscal year. Okay, any questions on timeline? Okay.
Actually,
Right.
let me ask you that question now. It's actually related to something you covered a moment ago, but if the applicant is a new business or a new building with no power usage, can they still apply with forecast power usage, or should they wait until they have a full year of kilowatt data?
Yeah, great question. So it kind of depends on a few other things. If there's no residents associated, then most likely it would be eligible to apply, even if it's brand new. Maybe they just purchased it and there's no historic utility bills. And if it's a solar system, it will just score as an energy generation project instead of an energy replacement. And the difference between those two types of projects, generation versus replacement, is about 5 points in scoring. So there will be a slight disadvantage there, but as long as there's no residents, we could do a solar system on a new building or new business. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so a couple things, perfect, related to scoring. The more energy that is replaced or saved, the higher the score. Quicker the payback time is going to result in a higher score. If the applicant has never received a REAP grant before, there's points for that. There's also points for socially disadvantaged and veteran owners. And I've also got a list here of the rural development key priorities. There is priority points for any applicants that are located in an area. There's links to these maps where you can plug in the address. And it's not something that the applicant is required to do. I'm just sharing things that we have here and how we determine priority points and scoring considerations. And lastly, I have a map here that shows the who your local contact is for USDA and who you can call to discuss projects and submit applications. It's broken up by county, and then yes, we've got names and phone numbers for you. That's all that I have, but I would love to answer if there's any more questions.
I don't see any other questions at this time. Should give a minute or so for anyone else who wanted to ask a question. That was a really good presentation. Thank you so much, Micah.
Thank you.
Oh, there we go. Can you show the map again with the regions? Okay, thank you for that. So, no more questions? Oh, can you apply for a grant and loan guarantee?
Yes, you can. So the one thing to keep in mind if you're going to be applying for both is the applications should both be submitted at the same time. So hopefully your lender will be mindful of you applying for a grant as well. And the lender could then submit the grant application and the loan application. Yeah.
We have a question from out of state here. Do you have contact information for Oregon?
I do not in this presentation, but if you go to USDA Rural Development's website and you navigate into the energy program page, there should be an easily accessible link that will take you to a list of all of the energy coordinators. So I would be on there for Washington, and you should be able to get the Oregon contact info that way.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Micah. And this is a wealth of information. As I said, I'm going to work with Micah to get the links that were presented today and include them in an email back to you over the next few days. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody who attended. If you're a member, I hope to see you next week at the member meeting, the Solar Washington member meeting. Whether you're a member or not, I hope you sign up for the February 3 webinar, the PACE Equity Cirrus Low Carbon Funding Options on February 3. Please answer the quick survey that's coming up next. Thank you very much. And you all have a fantastic weekend. And thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.